So to me, the UK Alliance for Disaster Research is such a precious group of incredible academics who work together at all levels, be they early career researchers or be they very senior. But the wonderful thing about UKADR, as I show you, and as Ashley is sitting in front of the logo, is that the great thing about it is that it's a voluntary group that links to things like the Global Alliance for Disaster Research Institutes, but also links very closely with many other networks, because we feel these networks really matter. And what I discussed with Ashley was that it'd be fun to share with you some of the opportunities and challenges for preparedness and response and how these link to the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. Now, I cannot not start at a time like this without talking about the Conference of the Parties that's happening in UAE as we speak, on looking at the issues about climate change and all the work that is going on there. So I think it's really important that we all think about that, and I will come back to refer to it quite often. But what I thought was really important is that yesterday was the big health day. And it's the first time we've had a formal health day at the Conference of the Parties from UNFDRR. And this time, the message has come out very strongly that the climate crisis is a health crisis. And I thought it'd be very important to remember this and to share with you a link that talks about this. And just to remind you, it's all our health and well-being and all the other issues that relate to it that part of this Conference of the Parties in Dubai is going to address. Why does it matter? So I feel this is a really horrible but quite relevant diagram that was produced by IPCC for the AR6, the Assessment Report 6 in 2022. Sorry, I got the date wrong at the bottom, I suddenly noticed. But the source. What you see is we're now 2020, right? That line in the middle, as I'm sure you can see this straight down. Now, for those people who were born perhaps in the 1970s, 80s, you will have always known that a normal year is spring, summer, autumn, and winter. But more and more as we move forward, as children get born in the 80s, children get born in the 2020s, these people may never see a normal spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Climate change is impacting on all of us. And that's what's really worrying us. And what are the risks? And this is why it's so important we don't go to the very high scenarios, but we try and aim for the low to very low if we can, and try and stay under 1.5 degrees C of warming that we predict for the future. That just really makes us very much aware of what we might face. And from the point of view of WHO, we know that climate change increases the vulnerability to many for vulnerability factors, exposure pathways, and health systems capacity and resilience. And we know that climate-sensitive health risks can increase mortality and morbidity from extreme weather events, heat-related illness, respiratory illness, waterborne diseases, and other vector-borne water-related diseases, zoonoses, vector-borne diseases, malnutrition, non-communicable diseases, and of course, mental and psychosocial health, let alone the impact on the healthcare facilities themselves. Only yesterday, in the Health Day, Bill Gates was talking about his real concern about vector-borne diseases, because we know these health emergencies are really complex, and that the effects of these health emergencies are compounding and cascading and interacting. And that really worries us. So I wanted to take you to something that we did last year for Sharm el-Sheikh for COP27. That particular UN climate change conference, and we talked about the 10 new insights in climate science. Now, a lot of these are very, very obvious, but I thought I would just pick out 3 of these 10 new insights, because I just thought if we just talked about questioning the myth of endless adaptation, is it possible we can adapt to everything? I thought that this figure here was really important. It shows that the frequency of adverse impact and the intensity of adverse impact really are frightening, and that we might head towards these intolerable risks up here, which are really worrying, where the soft limits of adaptation are really quite low and the hard limits are there too. So we really must stay within our 1.5 wherever we can. But we also know there's a vulnerability hotspots, clusters in regions where people are particularly vulnerable. So this could be, if you're in the semi-arid regions, looking at exposure to rising temperatures, erratic rainfall and biodiversity decline. And this has been particularly driven by El Nino. And just think about the floods in Somalia that have been happening, that have really caused huge problems and so unexpected, which means that a lot of the food crops have been wiped out. So the rainfall being erratic has really damaged Somalia already. But just think about the glaciers and mountains. We know that glacial retreat is a very big issue. What will happen? I don't know. And then think about the low-lying coastal regions. So many places have islands. The UK certainly has plenty of islands, but we know that the rising sea levels and extreme storms are going to be a huge problem. And monsoons, they're a risk too. But what about the tropical forests? All these things that we worry about. So let's think about the new threats on the horizon from climate health interactions that we shared last year. We know that climate change is happening. We know that there's selected risks we're worried about of infectious diseases, loss of biodiversity, floods, wildfires, and extreme heat. And we know we need that surveillance and early warning systems that are increasingly important. Because what we know of these consequences, that if we have these risks of loss of biodiversity and other issues, we will have increased pesticide use, increased antimicrobial use, which might cause more antimicrobial resistance, decline in ecosystem functions, decline in food production, which was very much an issue at COP yesterday and will remain an issue over the next few days, increase in pathogen spillover, and of course this change in vectors and pathogens. And the impact is mental, physical and mortality, but it's on humans, domestic animals, wild animals and plants. And we know we need to understand this better. So there's a lot of work to go ahead. But of course, as a healthcare professional, I can't not tell you that at the same time as all this has been going on, we've had COVID. And we do have some wonderful systems where data is shared. So this is the data from the 30th of November, i.e. last week, from the WHO COVID dashboard, where we're looking at the number of cases. Over 770 million cases have been confirmed. We have very nearly 7 million confirmed deaths, but we have 13.5 billion vaccines that have been administered. There's a lot of work that's been going on, but to have this data is really important. But we know that when we reviewed 21, that although we had many countries affected, many healthcare workers affected, we knew that 90% of school children were probably unable to attend schools. We knew gender-based violence increased, and we pushed people back to extreme poverty. And when the independent panel on about this, they said multi-sectoral coordination of preparedness has been lacking. And they said that the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction includes pandemic risk in its purview and disaster risk reduction capacity building, which had largely been separated from the health sector pandemic preparedness efforts. So we know that the Sendai framework is really important, that these should come together. What we had in 2015 is this incredible time with the Sendai framework, the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals all coming in together. And you can see the timelines on the left about how long it took to get to these wonderful agreements for 2015 and how to try and deliver them well. So the Sendai framework is that thin blue brilliant report, which has this very clear messages of a global outcome, guiding principles, 4 priorities for action, and these 7 global targets of reducing mortality, affected people, economic economic loss and damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services. But also this need to increase our understanding of what the disaster risk reduction issues are, and the international cooperation development and the availability of multi-hazard early warning systems. So let me turn just to the health side for a moment. We have the international health regulations, which have been mandated and are really important to us. But we know that we need the resilience of health systems, the capacity of health workers, and we need to promote disaster medicine and how these all link together with the Sendai framework. So WHO, World Health Organization, did a great piece of work pulling all these different processes together and brought in the WHO Health Emergency and Disaster Risk Management Framework in 2019. What does this do? Well, it takes the international health regulations, the Sendai framework, shows what the international health regulations does particularly, but what the Sendai framework has driven us to do is this whole of government, whole of society engagement. And what it's done is to align global health security, disaster risk reduction, humanitarian reform, climate change and sustainable agendas by health and multi-sectoral communities provide so much of the evidence we've been working on for so many years inside health to many of the other resources. On WHO also have something that I think is truly precious. And as we've got Japanese colleagues online, I thought you would like to know that the World Health Organization Kobe Center has been absolutely brilliant to us. It has the Health Emergency Risk Management Network, and we have a research network, we have research projects, we have a knowledge hub, but we also have published our research methods for health EDRM. And this was published first in 2021, updated in 2022, and will be further updated as we move forward to 2025 when we have the next meeting for the World Association of Disaster and Emergency Medicine in Tokyo in May 2022. What it does is talking about an introduction of why we do it, identifying and understanding the problem, determining the scope of your study, issues about study design, special topics to demonstrate research processes and benefits, addressing emergency research methods. But one thing that I love for so many early career researchers is how to become a researcher. And I love the fact, Ashley, you found this a useful resource for the teaching you've done, but also do dive into it because it talks to you about ethics, data, standards, publications, getting your research grants, all the other things you might need. It's been a huge challenge, and please tell us what might be missing. But most importantly, each of these chapters, all 44 of them, have webinars, videos, and podcasts you can use yourself whenever you need them. But the other thing we've just published only last week was the Health Emergency and Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Hub, and you can see guidance on healthcare data management, on mental health, on community disaster risk management for addressing disaster literacy, but also workforce development for health EDRM. Things that have just come out, so you can see it's an active group delivering lots of things. But let's just go on a little bit further and look at the fact that the Sendai Framework Monitor is now live. And what we found was that there was a real concern that countries were finding it very difficult to understand what all hazards were. So we've published the Hazard Definition and Classification Review in July 2020 and the Hazard Information Profiles in October 2021. You mentioned these, Ashley, as well. And we've done this by working across over 40 of the UN organizations and agencies, many International Science Council partners, our Industrial Science Forum partners through the Insurance Development Forum, but also the International Humanitarian Organization, particularly our lovely friends in the International Federation and Red Cross, Red Crescent. But many volunteered, and we reached out to many. And we had a very clear process of looking at science glossaries, UN glossaries, consultations and surveys and many things. And we've come up with 302 hazards, which cover meteorological, extraterrestrial and space weather, geological hazards, environmental hazards, chemicals, biological, technologicals, including cyber hazards, waste, and all sorts of other things. And for completeness, we were allowed to include societal hazards of conflict, post-conflict, behavioral, and economic. And these hazard information profiles look like this. They are very simple, just defining what the hazard is, where the source is, synonyms, additional scientific information, linking wherever we can to metrics and in relevant UN conventions with examples of drivers, outcomes, and risk management. So this was published in 2021, but what was wonderful at the time of the publication was that UNDRR and ISC said that they provided a resource that provided a common set of hazard definitions for all three of these wonderful UN 2015 landmark agreements. And in the midterm review of the Sendai framework, it was really exciting to see them called groundbreaking. We were very delighted by that. But now we know that this must be used widely, and we hope scientists will use it. You, as scientists, please tell us what works and what doesn't work, because we're increasingly looking at addressing complex and cascading and compound hazards and risks, because we're now in phase 2, the update for May 2025 global platform, and in the future regular review is planned. So why do we need these hazard information profiles? We need it for the risk registers, but we also need it for things like early warning systems. And you may notice that in March 23rd, 2022, the early warning systems were very much called for, and these are now taken forward with the Early Warning for All Executive Action Plan, which talks about disaster risk management knowledge that UNDRR are leading a lot on, detection, observations, monitoring, analysis and forecast that WMO, World Meteorological Organization, UNDP, UNESCO and UNEP are doing a lot on, and then how to warn and disseminate. The International Telecommunications Union are much involved, and then how to respond is very much led by the International Federation of the Red Cross Red Crescent. Does that matter? Yes. If we go back to COP28, loss and damage is going to be key, and you'll see that a lot of money has been given to this fund only in the last day or so. So how do we have our knowledge? Well, there are many different sources for a lot of this work, from WHO to the World Meteorological Organization to heat health networks to early warning networks to the European Union Observatory, as well as to UK Health Security Agency, the group I work for. And what we do know is that they're really concerned about severe weather and extreme weather events, but increasingly we're looking at vectors, but water quality impacts, but equally environmental degradation. All these things, including extreme heat, are very important because we know that there's increased illness and deaths and increased health inequalities, which increases vulnerabilities. So we really need to do something about that. So we have the UK Health Security Agency, which has launched our new Centre for Climate and Health Security in October last year, and it's moving forward at great speed. And the purpose is to link locally, nationally, and internationally to raise the awareness of impacts of climate change and health. And this is very important for us because our colleagues are at the Conference of the Parties in Dubai, our Chief Executive, our Chief Science Officer, and our head of the Centre for Climate and Health Security are there amongst others, because we need to make sure that we are prepared for all these different things. So I'm sure many of you will be watching a lot of the COP being live streamed, but I've mentioned to you that it's not just climate that's an issue, it's all the other things like COVID that remain an issue, that we've done a lot of work in health emergency planning and how we can do research methods, which is really important for all of you, how we link together to our classification review and our hazard information profiles that will be reviewed and updated for 2025 for our 302 hazards, and make sure that we have umbrellas, but also specific hazards, and get all the information in, because we need that early warning and early action for all, amongst many other things.